Welcome to this edition of PHADA's Video Current Issues. I'm Blake Stenning, Director of Communications, and I'm here with Executive Director of PHADA, Tim Kaiser, to talk to you today about cash management in public housing. Tim, HUD has not officially released any formal proposals or regulations on cash management at this point.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what cash management is and why it is of such a concern for
Yeah,
PHADA?
sure. HUD's indicated they're in the early stages of their thinking relative to cash management. And PHADA is trying to get out ahead of this issue because we think it is very important, even though very few people really know what is meant by cash management. So as we'll discuss and as indicated in our issue brief, perhaps the biggest concern on this issue is that agencies might be expected to use their rental income first, their operating reserves, or other available sources of money, and then subsequent to incurring expenses, requisition their operating funds from the department. Now, the Public Housing Operating Fund right now totals about $4 to $5 billion annually. So there'd be thousands of transactions involved in the course of these procedures. And we have a lot of concerns about both the policy and the process that would be used.
Mm-hmm. So it appears that the public housing operating reserves are the main rationale for cash management.
Right. Yeah.
Can you explain why this is really a flawed rationale?
Yeah, that seems to be the major rationale for this thinking about the need to institute this system. At PHADA's recent meeting in Washington, the department acknowledged that housing agencies have about $7 billion in long-term commitments and obligations. Conversely, they've acknowledged that the total operating reserve is in the neighborhood of $4.5 billion nationally. So this idea that there are excessive reserves, I think, is, by HUD's own data, it's demonstrated that that's a flawed rationale. And housing agencies need their reserves ready at hand for any number of reasons, pointed out in the issue brief. But some examples are unforeseen consequences like natural disasters, roofs, needing immediate repair, and other unforeseen events. So we're concerned that this idea that reserves should be transferred back to the Treasury, that could have really negative consequences for agencies and the residents they serve.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, PHADA has pointed out too that another concern is HUD's own capacity, including its IT capacity.
Yes. Yeah.
So can you elaborate a little more on this, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's well known, and not casting aspersions on the department or the personnel, but it's well known that the department's IT systems are both underperforming and overtaxed. And if HUD moves to implement a cash management system, you're talking about the need to handle thousands of transactions, and we think that service delays from Washington to individual agencies would be inevitable, delays in payments, and that would create negative consequences again for the agencies at the local level and for the residents they serve.
Mm-hmm. Now, PHADA has also asserted that that cash management may undermine some congressional objectives and HUD objectives.
Yeah, we really do believe that. If you look at recent laws and policies, Congress enacted the Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act, otherwise known as HOTMA. And one of the provisions in there allows PHAs to establish replacement reserves for repairs, in other words, to build reserves so that they can do repairs needed for quality of life improvements for residents. If the government effectively takes back the reserves, obviously you can't build those and accumulate those reserves. So that would be thwarted. There's an operating fund financing program we think that would be undermined because of the same reasons. We think the rental assistance demonstration could be negatively impacted because many agencies have used their funds to improve the living conditions in advance of converting under the RAD program. So we think some of these beneficial policy objectives would be undermined by this cash management policy. I would point out, too, that the department scores housing authorities on their performance under the public housing assessment system based on how much reserves they've accumulated. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the government recognizes agencies need reserves and in fact uses that to grade every agency's performance. So you would have agencies, we think, placed in financial peril, and therefore their scores would go down under that assessment system. Another reason why we don't think HUD should implement this policy.
So what, in closing then, what is PHADA's overall recommendation to HUD on cash management?
Well, first, bring in the experts, the certified public accountants who have advised PHADA that this is not a good idea. The chief financial officers from housing authorities need to be brought in and consulted to explain their concerns, which again are significant. HUD should more carefully look at its own data on reserves. Clearly, the government's own data and information shows that the idea that there's excessive reserves, that's simply not the case. Right. It should seek a waiver from the Office of Management and Budget if the department believes that it's compelled to do this. The department officials have acknowledged they can seek a waiver. We believe they should do it. And then lastly, we ask that our members use the information in here to talk with officials at the department, their representatives in the House, and their U.S. senators. We just simply think this is a really flawed idea, and the department should abandon it for all of the reasons stated in the issue brief.
Well, thank you, Tim, today for talking with us about this very important issue. For more information on cash management, you can visit PHADA's website at www.phada.org. There you can download a copy of this issue brief on cash management. And in the meantime, PHADA will continue to keep its members apprised of any new developments. Thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.